Waco, Texas, the 17th of May, 2015. 9 men shot dead on a restaurant patio in the middle of a Sunday afternoon. 18 more left bleeding. And it all started over a single word stitched to the back of a leather vest. They'll tell you it began over a parking space, 2 clubs, 1 lot, a foot run over, a shove. But the parking space was never the real reason. 177 bikers went to jail that day. More than 430 weapons came off that strip mall lot. And underneath all of it sat one strip of curved fabric on the bottom of a vest, a patch claiming a piece of Texas that another club said wasn't theirs to claim. Grown men opened fire in broad daylight over who was allowed to wear one word on their back. To an outsider, that makes no sense. To anyone inside American motorcycle club culture, it makes perfect sense, because the whole world runs on a set of rules nobody ever wrote down and everybody enforces. These rules didn't come from a book. They came out of California in the years after World War II, when soldiers came home, bought cheap surplus bikes, and rebuilt the only thing the army had ever given them, that they actually missed a chain of command, a brotherhood, and a code. The image of the dangerous biker gang burned into the American mind on a July weekend in 1947, when a motorcycle rally in the little town of Hollister got out of hand and Life magazine ran a staged photo of a drunk on a bike surrounded by beer bottles. The town of 5,000 had been swamped by 4,000 riders. There were around 50 arrests. Hollywood turned it into the wild one a few years later, Marlon Brando in a leather jacket, and the outlaw biker was born as a permanent American character. What grew out of that weekend is bigger now than most people realize. The Department of Justice today counts more than 300 outlaw motorcycle gangs operating in the United States, and it puts 4 of them at the top: the Hells Angels, the Outlaws, the Bandidos, and the Pagans, the so-called Big Four. Each one holds ground. The Angels alone run hundreds of charters across dozens of countries, out of a mother chapter in Oakland that Sonny Barger built into the template every modern club copied. The Outlaws, born near Chicago, own the Midwest and carry a slogan that isn't a joke: God forgives, outlaws don't. The Bandidos run the South and stretch across the world. The Pagans barely leave the East Coast, never went international, and never had to, because the fight they care about is regional and permanent, and when these clubs go to war, it's rarely over nothing. It's over territory, real geography, where a club controls the security contracts for bars and events, runs its businesses, and moves its product. These are not car clubs that happen to ride bikes. They are, in the government's own language, criminal enterprises, and they are governed from the inside by a code far older and far stricter than anything in the law that hunts them. Nearly 80 years on, from the Hells Angels and the Outlaws down to the club forming in somebody's garage this weekend, those same rules are still in force. Break them, and you can lose your patch. Lose your bike, lose your teeth. In more cases than the culture likes to admit, lose your life. Some of these rules trace straight back to a prison yard, where the biggest clubs learned to organize men by the color of their skin. One of them turned the 2 worst massacres in this history into events that weren't wars with rivals at all. They were clubs executing their own members. And the patch that lit up Waco runs through more than one of them. Here are the rules American motorcycle clubs still follow to this day, where each one actually came from, and what happens to the men who break them. Rule 1. Stick to your set. Start with the ugliest one, because it explains almost everything that comes after it. A large number of American outlaw clubs still organize along racial lines. A black set, a white set, a Hispanic set. Members party separately, function separately, and in a lot of clubs, ride separately. From the outside, it looks like nothing but old prejudice on wheels. The roots go deeper than that, and they don't start on a highway. They start behind bars. Most of the biggest American clubs got their footing in California, and California is where prison politics were invented. When the state's prisons began to desegregate in the 1960s, the inmates didn't blend together. They did the opposite. They self-segregated for protection, and out of that came the most powerful prison gangs in the country, every one of them built on race. The Aryan Brotherhood, formed at San Quentin in 1964, a white gang seeded in part by white bikers that the FBI has estimated makes up less than 1% of the prison population, while accounting for more than 20% of its murders. The Mexican Mafia, La M, which controls the Hispanic yard under a rule as simple as it is, permanent, blood in, blood out. Nuestra Familia, out of Soledad, and here the line cuts even finer than race, because Nuestra Familia rose specifically as a Northern California Hispanic power against the Mexican Mafia's southern one, Norteños against Sureños, a split so deep that the two sides of the same ethnicity have been killing each other in the yard for 60 years, over which half of the state a man comes from. The Black Guerrilla family, founded at San Quentin in 1966, 4 organizations, 4 colors, 1 logic. Inside those walls, you fall under the card of your own race, or you don't survive. And the Aryan Brotherhood didn't stay behind the walls it formed, working alliances on the street with outlaw clubs like the Hells Angels and the Vagos, which is exactly how prison logic bleeds into motorcycle logic. So here's the problem that creates for a club. If your club lets different races ride together on the street, what happens the day one of your brothers goes inside? He has to line up with his race in the yard, which can mean lining up against the very men he calls brothers on the outside. The prison gangs know this, and they use it. They control from the inside what happens on the outside, because it is far too easy to reach a member's family, a member's friend, a member sitting on a different yard, in a different prison. A mixed club becomes a liability the moment one of its members catches a sentence. That's why a lot of clubs never solved the problem. They just kept the races apart, and they carried that rule everywhere, even across oceans. Clubs that expanded into other countries have still turned away certain members over it. The only time it bends is when a club wants a foothold in a new territory badly enough to trade the rule for the expansion. The prejudice survives, but underneath it, there's a cold operational reason, and the reason is the yard. You don't have to guess how deep this runs, because one of the most famous clubs on Earth was born out of it. In the late 1960s, a group of Hispanic Vietnam veterans in East Los Angeles wanted to ride with the Hells Angels. They were turned down. The reason was their ethnicity at the time. The Angels didn't take non-white members. So, on the 5th of December, 1969, in Montebello, California, 15 of those rejected riders founded their own club instead. They chose a cartoon of a Mongol warrior on a chopper for their patch and called themselves the Mongols. They voted to become an outlaw club in 1974. That single rejection started what many people consider the longest-running feud in motorcycle club history, a war between the Mongols and the Angels that has now run more than 50 years and included the shootout at the Sign, Laughlin River Run in Nevada in April 2002, where a brawl inside Harrah's Casino left 3 bikers dead, 2 of them Angels and 1 a Mongol, and roughly a dozen more hospitalized, all of it caught on the casino's cameras. And it isn't only the clubs. Go back to the very beginning. The American Motorcyclist Association, the body these outlaw clubs defined themselves against, was a whites-only organization from the 1920s into the 1950s. The word outlaw originally didn't even mean criminal. It meant a club that broke AMA rules, including the rule against accepting members who weren't white. The color line was baked into the culture before the culture had a name for itself. But the rule was never total, and this is the part almost nobody knows. In 1959, while Jim Crow was still the law of the land, 5 full years before the Civil Rights Act, a rider named Lionel Ricks founded a club in Los Angeles with 6 friends, all of them black. They called it the Chosen Few. Within a year, they took in their first white member, a man the club history remembers only as White Boy Art, and they kept going, adding Latino, Asian, and Middle Eastern riders at a time when an integrated group of bikers drew slurs, violence, and heavy police attention in South Central. The Chosen Few became the first racially integrated 1%er club in the world, and they wore red and white, and they carried a creed built around the line, "Many are called." Alongside them rode black clubs, like the East Bay Dragons up in Oakland, another generation of riders who built their own set because the existing sets wouldn't have them. And here's the thing that matters most about the Chosen. Few more than 60 years later, they are still running. Not as a footnote. As one of the oldest, continuously operating 1%er clubs in America of any color. So the rule is real and the exception is real, and they've been sitting side by side inside the same subculture the entire time. One club built a wall, another club, in the same city, in the same decade, under harsher law, tore it down. Both survived. You can still see the line in daylight. No prison and no patch required. It spilled straight into how the culture throws a party. There's a reason America has a Daytona Bike Week and a Black Bike Week down in Myrtle Beach and Atlantic Beach, a Harley set and a black set, celebrating the exact same machine on separate weekends in separate towns. The events split the same way the clubs split, for the same reasons the clubs split. Same passion, same bikes, same open road, two separate worlds that rarely touch. And most of the riders in either one have never set foot in a prison in their lives, but the geometry of the whole thing was drawn in a prison yard decades ago, and it held. That's how deep this rule runs. It outlived the men who made it necessary, and it shaped a Saturday afternoon rally full of people who couldn't tell you where it came from. Which brings us to the moment a man actually tries to get in the door, because before any of this even applies to you, you have to survive becoming a member at all. Let me say one thing, and then I won't bring it up again. I have gathered everything you could possibly imagine about bikers and hidden secrets into this book. Available at my website, theinvestigator.com. If you want it, it is there. That is all. Rule 2. Earn it the hard way. Nobody walks into a serious motorcycle club and gets a patch. You prospect. And prospecting, in a real club, is designed to break you down before it ever builds you up. This one doesn't land the same way everywhere. Some clubs treat a prospect as a future brother from the first handshake and won't put him through anything degrading because they see no point in humiliating a man they intend to trust with their lives. Plenty of others will run a prospect through months, sometimes years, of the strangest, most demeaning tasks they can dream up. Wash every bike in the club. Guard those bikes all night in the cold while everyone else is inside drinking. Fetch the drinks, light the cigarettes, stand at the door. Do it again tomorrow and the day after that, and don't complain. None of it is really about the bikes or the cigarettes. It's a stress test, and it comes straight out of the military that built these clubs in the first place. Remember who wrote these rules? The pissed-off bastards of Bloomington, organized in California in 1945. The Hells Angels, founded in Fontana on the 17th of March 1948 by a World War II veteran named Otto Friedli, who split from the bastards to start his own club, a club whose name came from a bomber squadron. The Outlaws, the oldest of the Big Four, running since 1935 out of a town near Chicago. The Bandidos, started in 1966 in San Leon, Texas, by a Vietnam veteran named Don Chambers. The men who forged these customs learned discipline in boot camp, and they rebuilt boot camp on two wheels. Hazing a prospect is basic training. It answers one question, and only one question. When this club tells you to do something pointless, painful, and beneath you, will you do it without a word? Because if you'll quit over washing a bike, you'll quit over something that actually matters when it counts. Loyalty gets proven in the small humiliations first, so it can be trusted in the large ones later. And it starts before a man is even a prospect. First, he's a hang-around guy the club tolerates being near it, watched constantly, trusted with nothing, testing whether he even fits. Only if he clears that does he get to prospect, and prospecting itself can drag on for a year, 2 years, sometimes longer, entirely at the club's discretion. There is no fixed calendar. It's over when the members decide it's over, and not one day sooner. The patch itself gets handed over the same way in stages, never all at once. A prospect who makes it starts with a top rocker, the club name curving across his upper back. The center emblem and the bottom rocker come later, only when the full members vote him in, and that vote often has to be unanimous. A single no can end years of a man's effort in a second. Every piece is a checkpoint. Every piece has to be earned. That slow, deliberate handover is the whole philosophy in miniature. Nothing in this world is given, everything is paid for, and the club decides the price. There's a harder edge to this rule that the culture doesn't always say out loud, and it cuts at the men who are already patched. If you're in a club and you notice some prospects getting hazed hard and others getting a pass, sometimes the real test isn't about the prospects at all. Sometimes it's about you, what you're willing to stand up for, and what you're willing to swallow. A man has to decide whether he's the type to accept disrespect quietly or the type to hold his own ground and answer for it. And that decision depends entirely on the room he's standing in, because when 40 patched members are lined up on the other side of it, standing tall is a very fast way to end up on the floor. That tension, loyalty, pulling against self-respect, never really leaves a member. It just goes quiet. But before any of it matters, there's a piece of steel you have to be sitting on to even be in the conversation, and the club has very firm opinions about that too. Rule 3. Ride the right machine. In a motorcycle club, the motorcycle is not a detail, and it is not a formality. It is the literal price of admission, and clubs are specific, sometimes brutally specific, about what counts. For the traditional outlaw clubs, the answer has been the same for decades: American-made and big, Harley-Davidson, Indian. For years, the list also included Victory, though Polaris shut Victory down in January 2017, so today it comes down mostly to Harley and Indian, plus whatever older American iron a member already owns. Show up on a foreign cruiser and, in a lot of clubs, you simply do not get in. Some are a little more flexible. They'll let a man ride whatever he rides while he prospects. But before he gets fully patched, he has to be on an American V-twin, a Harley or an Indian, or the vote never comes. Others won't bend a single inch. No Harley, no patch, no American steel, no conversation. It sounds like snobbery. It functions as a border, and the requirement doesn't stop the day you're patched, it's ongoing. In the Hells Angels, a member whose bike sits broken down for more than 30 days without a good explanation can be fined for it. The rule isn't own a Harley. The rule is always be ready to ride one. And it isn't only the outlaw clubs that gatekeep the bike, and it isn't only about the country stamped on the tank. Sport bike clubs run the exact same rule from the other direction. Get into a fast club on a heavy touring cruiser and you become the problem because you can't keep up. When that pack lights up and takes off down the interstate, a slow bike is a liability that puts everyone at risk, so those clubs want machines that can genuinely run. The specific requirement shifts from club to club. One wants American, one wants fast, one wants a particular displacement, but the principle underneath never moves. Your bike has to be able to do what the club does, or you don't ride with the club. For the outlaw clubs, there's a second layer under the practical one, and it's about identity. The Harley is not just a motorcycle to these men, it's an American symbol, the same steel their founders rode home from the war on, the sound and the shape the whole culture was built around. Riding a foreign bike into a Harley club isn't only a performance question, it reads as a rejection of the thing the club is. That's why the requirement survives, even when the imported bikes are faster, cheaper, and more reliable. It was never really about performance. It was about belonging to a specific American story, and the machine is how you swear yourself to it. There's a reason the requirement holds so firmly, even now, in an era when anybody with decent credit can walk into a dealership and ride out on a monster. The bike is the filter. It's expensive. It demands constant maintenance. It demands real skill and real nerve, and it separates the people who live this life from the people who merely like the idea of it from a distance. Here's the twist, though even this rule has been broken by the very people who wrote it. When Ruben Doc Cavazos took over the Mongols, one of the oldest rules on the club's books was that every single member had to own and ride a Harley. Doc threw it out so he could recruit Hispanic street gang members faster and grow the club's numbers and its muscle. The rule that had helped define the club got sacrificed to expand the club. And that is a pattern you will see again and again in this world, so watch for it. The code stays sacred, untouchable, non-negotiable, right up until the moment power decides it's inconvenient. Owning the right bike, though, is only step one. What the club expects you to do with that bike is where a lot of men discover they never really understood what they signed up for. Rule 4. Keep up or get out. Owning the machine is not the same thing as being able to ride it, and outlaw clubs draw a hard, unforgiving line between the two. If you join a serious club, riding stops being a hobby and becomes an obligation you cannot dodge. There will be mandatory runs. It does not matter that it's raining sideways. It does not matter that you're exhausted or hungover, or that something is off and you're just not feeling right that morning. You get on the bike, or there are problems with the club, real ones, the kind that follow you home and don't leave. Turning out is not optional, because a club that only rides in good weather isn't a club, it's a fair-weather social group, and the outlaw world has a whole vocabulary of contempt for men like that. The run in the storm is the point. It's proof that the brotherhood outranks your comfort. The demand goes further inside the outlaw clubs, and it's a big part of why you don't see many young faces in them. In those clubs, keeping up with the pack is mandatory in the most literal sense. That is not something a rider picks up in a season, or 2, or 5. It takes years in the saddle to hold a clean line in a fast pack, in the rain, at night, with a bike on either side, and no room for error, which is exactly why the traditional clubs skew older. You will find young members in them, but they have to be genuinely, seriously skilled to survive the riding itself, and that kind of skill takes time. Nobody can fake, and nobody can shortcut. The formation itself is a language. Where you ride in the pack signals your rank. Officers hold specific positions, prospects hold the back and the outside, and the whole staggered line moves like a single organism at speed, changing lanes as one, protecting the members in the middle. A man who can't hold his slot, who drifts or brakes wrong or opens a gap, isn't just riding badly, he's broadcasting to everyone behind him that he doesn't belong there yet. And the obligations don't stop at the throttle. Every chapter holds a mandatory meeting, they call it church, and it has nothing to do with religion. In most clubs, it's weekly, often on a Friday night, and attendance isn't a suggestion. Miss church without a valid excuse and you get fined. Court records on the Hells Angels show figures in the range of $50 to $100 per missed meeting, and 3 unexcused absences in a row can put your standing up for a vote. There are dues too, real money, week after week. Angels court filings have shown anywhere from $20 to $75 a week, depending on the chapter, and fall behind, and you lose your vote inside the club. That money runs the clubhouse, funds the runs, pays for funerals, moves the officers around. Because there is a chain of command, and it's built straight off the military. A president who negotiates with other clubs and settles disputes, a vice president under him, a sergeant-at-arms whose entire job is enforcing discipline inside the club, a road captain who plans the routes and runs the pack on the highway. Even the prospect knows exactly where he stands in it, which is at the bottom, looking up. Riding is the heart of it, but membership is a job with a schedule, a boss, and a bill, and skipping any of it has a price. The bike gets you to the door. The riding decides whether you belong once you're through it. And once you are truly impatched, voted, accepted, there is one subject the culture treats more seriously than any other on this entire list, because getting out is far, far harder than getting in ever was. Rule 5. Leaving is the dangerous part. Anyone can quit a job. Quitting a motorcycle club is a completely different act, and the culture has an entire language for all the ways it can go wrong. In the traditional framework, there are really only 2 ways to leave. You can go out in good standing, retire with the club's full blessing, which is rare, and usually requires a reason the members genuinely respect, like age or health or a hard financial wall. Death while still a patched member counts too, and it's honored, sometimes with an honorary membership laid on after the man is gone. Or you go out in bad standing. Out bad. And out bad is not a resignation letter, it is a banishment, and it's designed to be permanent. You have to understand the expectation these men start from. You join for life. That's not a slogan printed on a shirt. It's the assumption baked into everything else on this list. The prospecting, the church, the dues, the tattoos. And internal discipline runs on a ladder that everyone in the club understands. A small failure gets you a fine. A bigger one gets you a beating from your own brothers. And, for the true betrayals, at the very top of that ladder, the punishment is the kind you don't come back from. Leaving cleanly means somehow stepping off that ladder without triggering any of it, which is why so few manage to do it without a mark. A man deemed out in bad standing is supposed to be shunned by the entire motorcycle community, not just his old club. He can't associate with members. He can't show up at functions. And the brand is engineered to travel. Other clubs are expected to refuse him, so that leaving one club can lock him out of all of them, sometimes for the rest of his life. Any club that takes in a man who's out bad from another club is sending a message of disrespect that can be answered with violence. The offenses that traditionally earned that mark were the serious ones. ratting. Stealing from a brother, sleeping with a brother's old lady, a drug habit that put the whole club at risk. That was the entire point of the label it marked, the men who had actually betrayed the code, so the rest of the world would know to keep them at a distance forever. But the culture itself will tell you the meaning has been watered down, and badly. Long-time voices inside the biker world point out that in a lot of newer clubs, out bad now just means anyone who leaves at all, and worse, that it's mutated into a political weapon. A member who disagreed with the direction the leadership was taking, a member who simply wanted to do something different with his life, a member who had become a rival the higher-ups quietly feared and wanted gone. All of them can get stamped out bad for reasons that have nothing to do with betrayal, purely so that no other club will touch them and nobody on the outside ever hears their side of it. The brand meant for genuine traitors gets slapped on inconvenient men, and once it's on, it's almost impossible to get off. That's why the seasoned voices in this world warn you to be careful listening to a man who's out bad 9 times out of 10, they say. He's carrying a grudge, and he'll lead you somewhere you don't want to go. Then there's the physical side, and this is where the culture's own reality outruns anything a television show ever invented. The colors and even the tattoos are considered the property of the club, not the man. A member expelled in bad standing can be forced to surrender them, and in some cases, that means the ink comes off by force. Most of the time it's a cover-up, a new tattoo laid over the old one, or the club simply orders you to have it covered and checks that you did. But sometimes the stories are darker, tattoos burned, cut, or ground off the skin. The versions you've seen dramatized on screen, all flames and torture, are far-fetched, and the culture will be the first to say so, but far-fetched is not the same as never happened. Men have been jumped for leaving, men have had their bikes taken. Some clubs, broke and petty, will demand you pay them money just to walk away, which keeps a man who doesn't have that kind of cash trapped in a club he's desperate to leave. That is exactly why the culture tells anybody thinking of patching in to spend real time around a club first, before ever wearing the bottom rocker. Watch how they treat the people who leave. Did they take a departing member's bike? Did they brand a man out bad who didn't deserve it? The answers tell you precisely what you'd be signing up for. Before the 2 killings that prove exactly how far this rule goes, quick reminder, if this is the level of detail you came here for, the subscribe button is how you make sure the next breakdown finds you. And here is the loop from the very start of this, finally paid off. The 2 worst massacres in the history of American and Canadian outlaw clubs were not wars with rival organizations at all. They were clubs killing their own internal purges, discipline turned inward, the machine consuming its own parts. On the 24th of March, 1985, the Hells Angels summoned 5 members of their own North Chapter out of Laval to a clubhouse in Lennoxville, Quebec. The North Chapter had become a liability-heavy drug users, undisciplined, unpredictable, suspected of skimming profits that were meant for other chapters. Roughly 41 angels were present that night. The 5 were shot dead and dumped in the St. Lawrence River, weighted and wrapped in sleeping bags. That single act of house cleaning was considered such an unforgivable breach of the outlaw code that 2 brothers who refused to stomach it, the Cazettas, walked away and built a rival club instead, the Rock Machine, rather than join the Angels who had done it. And that rivalry became the Quebec Biker War, one of the bloodiest organized crime conflicts in North American history. It ran, in bursts, for more than 15 years. By the time it burned out, the body count had climbed past 160, including innocent bystanders, one of them, an 11-year-old boy killed by a car bomb, alongside more than 80 bombings, and well over 100 arsons. All of it traceable back to one night in Lennoxville, when a club decided 5 of its own men had to go. Then, on the 8th of April, 2006, 8 members of the Bandidos were found shot in vehicles in a field near Shedden, Ontario, and among the dead was the club's own Canadian president. The killers were their own brothers, lured to a farm under the pretense of settling internal disputes. It remains the worst mass killing in Ontario's history, and it effectively ended the Bandidos in Canada. Leaving is the dangerous part, and sometimes the club doesn't even wait for you to leave, which is exactly why the one thing a member never surrenders willingly is the thing sewn onto his back. Rule 6. Never disrespect the colors. Of everything a club owns, Nothing is more sacred than its colors, the patch, the cut, the vest. Understand why, and half the violence in this entire culture stops looking random and starts looking like law. The colors are not a logo, they're a three-piece back patch, and each piece is a declaration. The top rocker names the club, the center carries the emblem, the bottom rocker claims the territory. Together, they are the closest thing a member has to an identity document, and every single stitch of it was earned through prospecting, never bought. That's precisely why the culture treats wearing colors you didn't earn the same way the military treats a civilian who pins on medals he never served for. It isn't a fashion violation, it's an insult that invites a beating, sometimes worse. Handing your colors over willingly is unthinkable, and having them taken from you is something a member is expected to fight for tooth and nail, because in this world, the patch is the man. Take the patch, and you've taken who he is. And here's the part that catches outsiders off guard. Even after a man is fully patched, the colors are still not his. In the Hells Angels, by the club's own rules, the patches remain the property of the club, not the member, which is why, the day a man leaves or gets thrown out, he has to hand them back. You spend years earning something you're never actually allowed to own. If that sounds like an exaggeration, look at how seriously the United States government took it. For more than a decade, the Justice Department and the ATF chased a single obsession in their long war on the Mongols. Not just to convict members, one by one, but to seize the club's trademarked logo, that Genghis Khan figure riding a chopper, back in 2008, when they first announced the case, AUS. Attorney said the goal was to make it so that any law enforcement officer could stop a member on the street and, in his own words, take the jacket right off his back. That case had a name, Operation Black Rain, and it was massive. ATF agents had spent years infiltrating the club from the inside, and when the hammer finally dropped, 77 members were convicted. But the convictions were never really the prize the government wanted most. The prize was the patch. They understood exactly what the colors were, the beating heart of the club's identity, the thing that made the Mongols, the symbol men had fought and bled to wear. Take that, and you don't just jail a few members, you erase the whole organization. In December 2018, a federal jury convicted the Mongol nation itself under racketeering law. Then, in January 2019, that same jury did something that had never been done before in American history. It ordered the club to forfeit its own logo. For a moment, the government was genuinely about to legally own a motorcycle club's colors. And then, a judge stopped it cold. In February 2019, U.S. District Judge David O. Carter refused to sign the forfeiture, ruling that stripping a club of its emblem would violate the First Amendment because the patch communicates a person's association with the group and his support for what it stands for. In other words, the colors are speech. He added that seizing a symbol the club had used continuously since 1969 would also violate the Eighth Amendment's ban on excessive punishment. Sit with that for a second. A federal judge protected a biker's patch on the grounds that it was protected expression, that the colors on a man's back were, legally, part of who he is. The club still ate a $500,000 fine, but the logo stayed with the Mongols, and a higher court later let them keep it. Even the full weight of the United States government learned the hard way what every prospect learns in his first week. You do not simply take a club's colors. That reverence shows up in the smallest rituals, and clubs actually disagree about them, which is part of the culture's endless argument with itself. In some clubs, you're not even allowed to wear your cut while riding inside a car. You fold it a very specific way and lock it in the trunk, because colors belong on a bike, on the wind, not inside a cage. In other clubs, you wear your cut wherever you please, in a car, in a truck, and nobody blinks an eye. So, is folding your vest into the trunk a mark of deep respect, or is it pointless ceremony invented to keep men in line? The culture has genuinely never agreed on that one, and members will argue it all night. But what the culture agrees on completely, without a single exception, is that the patch is never ever a toy. And that same reverence, the sense that the colors mean everything, is exactly what the next group of men are chasing, without ever paying for it. The ones who want the image and skip the price. Rule 7. No room for the costume. For every man who would bleed for his colors, there's another man who just wants the look. The culture has a very low opinion of him, and it enforces that opinion in its own direct way. Some men join outlaw clubs to buy a personality they never had the nerve to earn on their own. They watched their peers run wild when they were young, get into trouble, get locked up, live hard and dangerous while they stayed square, worked the job, did the right thing, kept their nose clean. Then middle age arrives, and with it a sudden, gnawing hunger to finally be the dangerous man they never let themselves become. So they patch into a smaller club, or they start one from scratch, and all at once they're moving through the world like a tough guy, giving orders and throwing weight around purely because there's fabric on their back. It's a midlife crisis with a kickstand and a set of loud pipes. Or they start one from scratch, and all at once they're moving through the world like a tough guy, giving orders and throwing weight around purely because there's fabric on their back. It's a midlife crisis with a kickstand and a set of loud pipes. The culture has a whole taxonomy for these people, and none of it is flattering. There's the weekend warrior who plays outlaw on Saturday night and clocks in at the office on Monday morning. There's the man who launches his own little club with a logo full of devils and flames and skulls because it looks meaner, a kind of Hell's Angels light, engineered to imply something dangerous that the man behind it has never once actually done. He was never going to prospect for a real club and survive the process, so instead he manufactures a costume that resembles the real thing from 100 feet away. And then there are the ones who want to look like the genuine heavy hitters, dressing the part of the pagans or some other feared outfit, walking around gripping an axe handle like they're truly ready to swing it at a human being, the entire performance built to project an image with absolutely nothing underneath it to back the image up. This matters far more than mockery, because the traditional clubs draw a hard, deliberate line between a real motorcycle club and everything that's merely imitating one, and that line has teeth. A genuine MC runs a three-piece patch, follows the protocol, answers to a strict hierarchy, and got exactly where it is, by permission and by blood. A riding club or a social group that wants to play dress-up in that same three-piece format is asking for a confrontation it may not walk away from, because the format itself is a claim, and claims you haven't earned get challenged by the people who did earn them. The image is cheap to buy and enormously expensive to defend when a real club decides to test it. That's the whole reason the culture reserves such contempt for the men who want the first without the second. And the policing of it is not just talk. A club that starts up in a dominant club's region, prints a three-piece patch, and doesn't go pay its respects, can expect a visit, a conversation that is not a request. Patches get taken off backs. Clubhouses get shut down before they open. The costume, it turns out, is the most dangerous thing a man can wear, precisely because it makes a claim his fists can't back. The real ones can always tell, and they check. And here's the cruel irony of the bad boy chaser. The image he's buying to feel safe and powerful is the exact thing that paints a target on him. A citizen in a t-shirt walks through the world unnoticed. A middle-aged man in a devil logo cut, playing outlaw in a region full of real ones, has volunteered for a fight he has no idea is coming. And the fastest way one of those costume outfits draws the attention of a real club is by running its mouth in the wrong place, which happens to be the one thing every serious member is trained, from his very first day, never to do. Rule 8. Keep club business inside the club. If you're a member of a motorcycle club, there is a wall between what happens inside and every single person standing outside it. Non-members do not cross that wall. Not your friends, not your family, not your co-workers, not the woman lying next to you in bed. The rule is blunt and it is absolute. No pillow talk. Your girlfriend does not know club business. Your wife, the old lady, in the language of the culture, does not know club business. And the reason is not that she can't be trusted with a secret. The reason is that the knowledge itself is a danger, to her and to you both. If something ever goes down, anyone who knows the club's movements instantly becomes a target, a witness, or a pressure point that rivals or police can lean on, and relationships end. That's just life. The day a relationship goes bad, everything she knows walks straight out the door, with her where you are, what you do, when and where you do it, who you do it with. And if she lands with a member of a rival club, angry and talking, she carries a detailed map of your life directly to the people who most want you gone. Men have died over exactly that chain of events. Talking in bed feels like the most harmless thing in the world. In this world, it can be the precise thing that gets a man killed and drags his whole family into the blast radius with him. Underneath the pillow talk rule sits the oldest law in the entire outlaw world, the one that every other rule on this list ultimately bends toward. You never, ever talk to law enforcement. Silence is the spine of the whole culture. It's the load-bearing wall. The Outlaws Motorcycle Club, the oldest of America's Big Four, founded all the way back in 1935 near Chicago, put it right on their own iconography: snitches get stitches. Their official slogan, "God forgives, outlaws don't," is not a marketing line dreamed up to sell t-shirts. A rat is the lowest thing a member can possibly become in this culture. Lower than a coward, lower than a thief, and being branded one is the single fastest route to going out bad, or to something far more permanent than that. There's a hard reason the paranoia runs this deep. Nearly every major case that has ever brought down one of these clubs was built the same way from the inside. An informant who flipped, an undercover agent who spent years earning a patch he never deserved just to record the men who gave it to him. The Mongols case that nearly cost the club its logo started with exactly that: agents embedded in the club for years. So the fear of the man who talks isn't abstract. It's the specific mechanism that has put more bikers in prison than any rival club ever has. Club business stays in the club not out of simple paranoia, but out of pure survival, because the entire structure of a club depends on one certainty: that what gets said inside the room dies inside the room. Every secure club that has lasted is built on that one foundation, and the moment it cracks, the moment one member decides to talk to the wrong person, in bed or in an interrogation room, the whole thing is exposed. The rule has only tightened in the phone era, because now the leak doesn't even need a mouth. What's said in church stays in church, full stop. No photos of the meeting, no club business posted online, no pictures of a member's cut without permission. And that's not paranoia either. Prosecutors have used a single social media post to establish gang affiliation in federal court. One photo of the wrong men in the wrong vests, tagged in the wrong place, has become evidence. So the modern member lives with a discipline the founders never had to think about: the understanding that a camera in every pocket is the newest way for club business to walk out the door, and that the man who posts is just a quieter version of the man who talks. And the clubs that keep their business the tightest are usually the very same clubs that hold the most ground. Which brings us all the way back around to the last rule, and to the 9 bodies lying on the patio in Waco. Rule 9. Respect the territory. Here is where the very first story finally pays off. Everything about Waco, the 9 dead, the 18 wounded, the 177 arrests, comes down to this one rule: the rule outsiders never see coming, because it is fought over a piece of cloth roughly the size of a bumper sticker. Look one more time at the 3-piece patch. The bottom rocker, the curved strip along the base of the vest, names a territory, a state, a city, a region, and it is, without any competition, the single most contested piece of fabric in the entire motorcycle world. Wearing a bottom rocker for an area that another club already claims can start a war faster than almost anything else a man can possibly do, because in this culture, a dominant club controls a region, and that dominant club's permission is the only thing that makes any territorial claim legitimate. A new club rising in that region cannot simply print up a bottom rocker and sew it on that weekend. It has to be recognized by the dominant club first, formally, with everyone understanding the arrangement. That's the entire reason you'll see 2-piece patches out on the road, a top rocker and a center emblem, but no bottom rocker at all, worn by clubs that are still growing, or still waiting, or still negotiating with the club that runs their area. The missing bottom piece is not an accident or an oversight. It's a signal, read instantly by everyone who matters, that the permission has not been granted yet. The whole system is visible right out in the open, if you know how to read it. Support clubs advertise it proudly. Riders who back the Hells Angels wear gear reading Support 81, because H is the 8th letter of the alphabet, and A is the first, so 81 is simply the Angels, without ever saying the name out loud. Support your local gear does the exact same double job. It raises money for the dominant club, and at the same time, it announces, quietly but unmistakably, precisely whose territory you are currently standing in. Ride through a region flying colors that challenge the club that owns it, and you have made a statement whether you intended to or not, and the club that owns that ground will answer the statement. And understand what owning a region actually means, because it isn't just pride. The dominant club controls the money that flows through that ground, the security contracts for bars and events, the motorcycle businesses, the routes the product moves along. Territory is revenue, and revenue is worth killing over. That's why the protocol around it is so precise that it governs a visiting rider's every move. In a lot of areas, if you show up to one club's function wearing your colors, you're now expected to show up to their rival's function too, or you've just announced which side you're on. And if a member of the dominant club walks up and tells you to take your vest off, the protocol is simple and old. You don't argue, you take it off. Because in that moment, you're standing on ground that isn't yours, wearing a claim you can't back, and the man in front of you is enforcing a border you didn't even know you'd crossed. None of this is new, and Waco was not the first time it turned into a bloodbath. The longest and most vicious rivalry between the big American clubs, the Hells Angels against the Outlaws, is, at its core, a fight over territory, and it went openly, permanently to war on April 27th, 1974, when 3 Hells Angels were killed and left in a rock pit in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. That single act launched decades of retaliation across multiple continents, bombings and ambushes and executions, 2 clubs trading bodies over which patches were allowed to fly on which ground. Territory is the oldest reason bikers kill each other, older than drugs, older than money, and the bottom rocker is territory made visible. Now go all the way back to Waco. Underneath the political meeting on the schedule that day, and underneath the parking space spark everyone talks about, the real war was territorial, and it had been building for a long time. The Cossacks had been wearing a Texas bottom rocker, claiming the entire state as their ground without the blessing of the bandidos, who had considered Texas theirs for decades. That was the true fuse, sitting there waiting. When it finally caught, on the 17th of May, 2015, at 12:24 in the afternoon, it burned through a crowded restaurant patio in a matter of seconds and left 9 men dead over a strip of curved fabric and the word stitched across it. And here is the part that keeps the whole thing an open, unhealed wound in that community. Police were parked right outside, monitoring the meeting the entire time. Investigators recovered more than 430 weapons from that lot, including 151 firearms. They arrested 177 people and hit them with million-dollar bonds. And in the end, after all of it, after the deadliest biker shootout in American history, not one single person was ever convicted of anything. The one biker who actually went to trial got a hung jury and a mistrial. The rest of the cases quietly collapsed and were dropped. 9 men dead, and no one at all held to account. The district attorney charged all 177 the same way, with the same broad crime, and the strategy collapsed under its own weight. The cases fell apart one after another. The charges were dismissed by the dozen, and a decade later, the community was still arguing about how a shootout that public, that deadly, in the middle of a Sunday afternoon, ended with 0 convictions. That is what a bottom rocker can cost, and how little the law was able to do about it afterward. So it turns out, the parking space really was never the point. The word Texas was the point. The territory was the point. In this world, a patch is a claim, and a claim is a border, and men will kill and die defending a border that exists nowhere on any map except stitched across the bottom of a leather vest. Look at all 9 of these rules together, laid side by side, and a single shape rises up out of them. Every one of them is really about the same 3 things: loyalty, respect, and control. Loyalty is what you prove by prospecting through the humiliation, by riding out into the storm when your body says no, by keeping your mouth shut when it would be so much easier to talk. Respect is what you show to the colors, to the territory, to the men who earned the patch you're chasing. And control is the reason for the race lines drawn back in the prison yard, the reason leaving can get a man killed, the reason a club will execute 5 or 8 of its own before it will ever let discipline slip in front of the world. These rules were not handed down by accident, and they were not written by lawyers. They were forged by veterans after a world war, hardened in California prison yards, dramatized by Hollywood, and paid for in real bodies, from a clubhouse in Lennoxville to a farm field near Shedden, to a strip mall patio in Waco. They are not laws. Nobody ever wrote them down in a single place. Governments have thrown racketeering statutes and decade-long infiltrations and 177-man arrests at these clubs, and the code has outlived every one of those efforts. Because you cannot indict an unwritten rule and you cannot seize a thing that lives in men's heads. Prospects still get broken down in garages tonight. Bottom rockers still get fought over. Somewhere, a man is being told he can't leave. And yet the code has outlasted almost every other unwritten rule in American life, generation after generation, because in this world, the vest on a man's back has never been just clothing. It is who he is, what he has sworn himself to, and what he will bleed to keep. That's 9. But every rider who's actually lived it knows the culture holds far more than 9, the rules too specific to a single club to make a list, and the ones too dark to say out loud on camera. So, if you know a rule that belongs on here, or you've watched one of these break a man in real life, put it down in the comments and let the rest of us learn from it. And if you want to keep going deeper into the codes that hold this entire world together, subscribe, because the rules we didn't cover today are the ones really worth sticking around for.